Okay, so I am sitting here with a friend. We have just gotten us some tea, and we're going to have a conversation about the challenges of mobilizing Asians. And so she's going to be headed to South Asia. I'll let her say a little bit more about that in a moment. And so I know she's got a pretty unique story about how she got there and the journey, and her own family story is even part of this. So thank you for taking time to meet and have this conversation with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're wanting to go do.
Yeah, so I'm going to be headed to Southeast Asia and working with a company there doing something called Business for Transformation.
Nice.
So that means working at a business, hoping to see transformation in the city, in the company, hopefully, in the company that would go out into the city and stuff too. So we know that true transformation happens through Christ, and so that is our motivating factor. And the bottom line there isn't what would be typical for companies, which is revenue. That's one of the bottom lines, but it's not the bottom line. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. So you've grown up here in Houston, but I know your family is from abroad. And so tell us a little bit about your family.
Yeah, so I am a Vietnamese American, and my parents are they're refugees, immigrants from Vietnam, and so they came over here and right after the war, and looking for a better life, looking for stability. Obviously, there is, tragedy and war that just happened, so they're looking for just a place to be okay. And so I was a daughter of immigrants, and so I was constantly told, live the American dream. We're here in America. Succeed, work really well, be a doctor. Not necessarily be a doctor, but be accomplished.
Right.
So that was the rhetoric that I always heard. And I grew up going to Vietnamese church, and I would say that's also the same, thing. The encouragement is to do well. You're in America now, you acclimate to American culture.
Yeah.
But you still hold on to the Vietnamese culture, but, being both and.
So I think also for a lot of Asian cultures, success is not simply a financial thing. It actually relates to like family heritage and honor and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I would say probably not as for achievements, that's really important. And I guess what the main goal is, how does this reflect the family, right? I think that's the bigger value.
Yeah.
How does this look on our family? How does this support our family? It's all about a communal thing.
So you're coming into this context from a background that puts a lot of emphasis on success and achievement. And here you are about to head overseas doing B4T. And so what was the process for you, or maybe just the big picture of how did you go from kind of feeling that sense of family pressure or obligation maybe to succeed and have the right path versus now what you're currently doing?
Yeah, I don't think that there was, so the desire to live abroad and do overseas work probably ignited. I didn't even think, I didn't have the framework for that when I became a believer. I was just like, oh, this is awesome. I love Jesus, and that is exciting. I was a middle schooler at that point, and so the following year, still in middle school, hearing about people in parts of the world that don't have access to, or maybe hearing about Christ for the first time, was really exhilarating for me, because I was like, whoa, this is really important, and people don't have that opportunity. And so I think in the back of my mind, I was just like, I wanted to do that, but I was like, I'm a kid, I can't do that, and I mean, I didn't have a framework of that, I learned about it in a conference that predominantly Americans, white, black Americans, not, in the Asian community. And so that's something that we didn't talk about in the Vietnamese church I grew up in, and so it's not normal. I was like, I'm a kid, I don't even have money, like I shouldn't do that. And so, but I think in the back of my mind, I always was like, I think I want to do that. Like I want to live abroad, I want to work overseas in that context. So the actual rub didn't happen until it was reality. So like after college, at that point you usually go get a job, And so I started thinking about specifically like what am I gonna do? And I just remember that desire I feel like God put in my heart, my head. And then when I pursued that, that's when the tension happens. And my parents were like, why? Like no one's ever done that, even though missionaries would come to our church, white missionaries, and talk about how they had lived Vietnam for X amount of years and stuff. I think back in it now, I was like, oh yeah, they did come and talk. I was really impressed by this white guy who could speak Vietnamese like fluently, which is, we thought was really cool. And they even had something that was like a conference thing, like who wants to go, like it was only one time that I remember they did that, and people like got on stage or whatever, but I mean there was no accountability to that. It was like, okay, that's like for show or whatever,
So most of the missionaries that came to your Vietnamese church were white, not Vietnamese?
Yes.
Okay, do you
all of them were.
All
I don't
of
think
them?
there were any. I could probably say there was like 2 or 3 of them. There's one older couple, I remember that. Yeah, this really old couple.
Okay, so I might be about to overemphasize something, but that's just because the average listener might not be aware of like how family pressure relates. Because coming from an individualistic society, we kind of do whatever we want without understanding the sense of like generational obligation.
Right.
So your parents came from Vietnam to the United States. They fled a war. They've put you through college to some degree or another.
Well, some of them. America put me through college.
Or at least expected you to go through college.
Yes.
Okay.
The government.
And you did some kind of, what kind of degree did you do?
It was
in
a
college?
business degree.
Business degree, okay. So all of this is respectable.
Yeah.
And now you come home and you say, Mom and Dad, I'm going to be a missionary.
Right.
How does that sit with your family?
Yeah, my dad isn't a believer, so he doesn't make sense of it. Like to him, he thinks I'm crazy. So that's that. But my mom, who has growing up going to church and know the context, right? She was like, why do you want to be American? Is that it was a very this is what Americans do, or like someone has convinced you to do this, because that's not, it doesn't seem logical. To her, it didn't seem logical. She thought I was doing it for my esteem, my own I don't know, maybe she thought at one point I wanted to be a martyr or something. I was like, no, I never said that. I wanted to do that. But to die is to gain. No, sugar. But I did say that in an argument with her, and she was like, what? She thought it was crazy. I don't think she understood the context. Anyway. So it was challenging, because it was I think in the back of her mind she thinks, because what I wanted her to say, what I think she was saying is I want you to be saved, I want you to be here, but some of it was you just want to do your own thing, you want to pursue your own thing, not what will honor our family or whatever, because then you're seen as poor, you're seen as all these other beggar and stuff.
Yeah.
And
so they see the choice for missions as kind of a manifestation of individualism just by itself. Okay, so you mentioned the poor thing. How does that work? Do Vietnamese churches support missionaries?
No, not that I know of.
Or missions in general, maybe?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't have the numbers to the books, and they haven't said anything. But I have gone on trips before, and they've supported me a little bit. But I was hey, I want to work in ministry full time. And I think the concept is more of oh, we have the pastor, and that's who we pay. And we put everything else towards, food and keeping the facilities. So we were a small church, though. We were like, and it dwindled over time. It's pretty small right now, but we only have like at most couple hundred, like 200 or something. And that's most churches in this area, at least, or in this city. No, not even 100. With everyone, maybe 100.
Wow.
It's quite small.
So I know that, the reason that we have so many Vietnamese in Houston relates back to the Vietnam War. Obviously a big schism between the North and the South, and communism and free. How are the people who left viewed by Vietnamese when they go back? Are they allowed to go back? How does all of that work?
Yeah, they're allowed to go back, and I think that the Vietnamese government I think at one point wanted more like Vietnamese foreigners to come back, but I think it doesn't make sense. I feel like my mom, she would be like, we left there for a reason.
Yeah.
Why would you want to go back? Even recently there was a new, like article about a group of Vietnamese people that are from a small village, and they tried to leave and work in a foreign country, and actually I think they were trying to get to London or Britain or whatever, same thing. But they were in this container, the shipping container, and it was like a refrigerator or something. I don't know the details, and they didn't live. Like, they died in this container. It was
So
like
they tried
39
to sneak
people.
in on a container?
They were trying to sneak in and work.
Wow.
And so a lot of them, their families gave all of their money, like they pooled money so that this one person can go and work and make more money and send back to the...
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty common in foreign countries. But
Yeah.
that happened recently. And so my mom, like, people are trying to leave because it's not good. Why would you want to? So it just doesn't make financial sense. To the goal of having an American dream, like, it doesn't make sense. So.
Is this your mother's opinion of what you're doing still, or has she transformed over time?
I think she's changed. She still thinks that, she's like, why do you want to live a hard life? I think she understands more now, but she thinks that it's not the most efficient way. She said, just send money to local pastors that are there, and that is like the best that you can do. Mm-hmm. And so I see what she's saying, and I think that that's one way to do it, but so yeah. See, but I feel like her relationship with the Lord has grown over the years too, and I think that she's not resistant. I think when I first told her, she was like, no, you're not gonna go. Now she's like, okay, she hasn't let down, so it's been years now, and she's still saying the same thing. So I think maybe she's seen that.
So Houston has what, 70,000-ish Vietnamese people here?
I don't know.
Okay, I think it's
I
something
know we
like
have one of the either the second or the third largest Vietnamese population in the U.S.
Yeah.
I would say the second. I think the first is Orange County.
Yes, yeah, I think you're right. They're one, we're two. I think Arlington is three.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, a lot of Vietnamese are Buddhist or animistic. Mm-hmm. The ones who are on the Christian side of that line, a lot of them are Catholic, and probably the smallest percentage will be evangelical. Mm-hmm. What is the church doing here in Houston or abroad to reach Vietnamese speakers?
Right. Yeah. I know what my Vietnamese church does, and I can't speak about abroad, but I know that they follow suit. So I would describe a lot of the things that we do, the church that I grew up in, as outdated. Like, I don't know why we do kind of some of the stuff that we still do, methods wise. They kind of did things that are were really popular in the 90s. So handing out tracts and even the style and the way that they do music, it's but it's all from a Western standpoint. Like this is all things that you would see Westerners do in the 90s. So it's like really strange to see. I'm like, why do we have music like this and stuff? Because it's like what they were taught years ago, you know, like when the church was formed. Or that's what they know when they brought it over here, at least.
So
Or the 80s,
you mentioned passing out tracts. I've talked with some of my Vietnamese students, and they've mentioned the same kind of thing, and I always feel a little bit challenged by that in the sense that, you know, okay, I'm a white guy, I can't speak Vietnamese. I could pass out a tract.
Right.
But they're Vietnamese and speak Vietnamese, and they can do things that I could never.
Right. But
it would take me a lifetime to learn how to do, right? Like speak Vietnamese.
But you also think about in this culture setting the power distance. So their power, who holds the power is the leader usually, and that's like so. They hand you a tract so they can get you to church because who can actually share the gospel and transform people, and maybe in their minds it's not probably what they think, but like, and what they say culturally, like the pastor does. So there's not a individualistic.
I see.
You know, so it's not like, oh, I do it and I share. I bring you to church so the pastor can speak to you.
So it's a more indirect approach.
Yes.
Even though on the surface it feels very direct.
Yes.
Maybe from where I'm sitting.
Yes, but it's indirect. Yeah.
I see. Interesting.
So that's what they were taught to do. This is a method, you know, it's methods.
Right.
And so that I think is what I've noticed is, I will say in the Vietnamese community, in the Asian community, we do fellowship really well. We hang out with one another. We love hanging out with each other and fellowshipping, you know. That's what we call most of our meetings. I remember growing up, we just like, yeah, we'll just have a time of fellowship. Like, what does that even mean?
It means food and time. At least in my culture, that's what that means.
Right. And we love doing that, eating food with each other and stuff. It's communal. But in terms of like, there's no sense of discipleship in the church growing up. Like, there is, like, you read the Bible, but like, you're not really encouraged to interpret it, or like, you take all the cues from the pastor. So it makes it harder to like kind of develop your own thought if you're kind of told like you can't really do that. You're not even taught how to do that, how to read the Bible on your own or whatever. So discipleship's just not a concept.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common in a lot of places.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the social or cultural factors that make it difficult for churches or Christians to share the gospel? You mentioned power distance, maybe more indirect cultures, or anything else you can think of?
I think getting outside of that I think a lot of it is cultural. We're told what we're here from American culture. So if you're talking to someone that doesn't, like, understands American culture but is thinking in an Eastern mindset, like, it kind of has to be reframed differently. Like, it has to be framed differently, you know? And there's, I don't know. There's a huge emphasis on, like, family and stuff. So that is something that it's a big barrier in deciding to follow Jesus, is like you give up something that is like integral to your culture and your people. So
well, I've found a lot of commonality with your story and many of the stories that I hear as I travel around and talk with people who kind of break away from their cultural norm of not doing missions, or seeing that missions is something that we receive missionaries rather than send missionaries. And it's fascinating to see a lot of those parallels. I think you've hit on these a lot of in your story. Yeah.
Right. And that's what I think with ethnic churches in general. It's like, how do you continue to keep it generation and generation? Like, because it's more than just a building. Then it's like a living organism, the body of Christ. And so I think what I've seen transfer is traditions and culture, but not like a real pursuit of God. And I feel like those people that are pursuing God really, like in the church that I grew up in, they are like in American churches. And so, which was like the biggest disrespect to my mom when I left the Vietnamese church.
Oh, interesting. I think what you're saying is true of pretty much every ethnic church leader or participant that I've talked with. A lot of people who come and they're part of an ethnic church, it's built around language, and for the first generation, a lot of times that's really, really important, but then it's this huge divide with the second generation who predominantly thinks in English and thinks like an American, more like an American.
Right.
And they are all struggling with how to transcend that, because for some churches it's almost a way, it seems like a way to maintain national identity or cultural identity.
Right.
Which then you start, like, just like you said, you start moving into more, it's about culture than about following Jesus, even though they would be consider themselves Christian, and I have no doubt are Christian, but yeah, that's kind of challenging for everybody. Is how do you move? And I don't know that I've met anybody that's got a really great answer, because it's either learn the home language and always be second class, or y'all learn English. And think like Americans and let's do American church, which then it's, well, why do we need a Vietnamese or Chinese or Korean or whatever church?
But
we just go to First Baptist.
I have seen some churches more recently, and the more you interact with other people of different upbringings, the more you like, oh, okay, I didn't know. But I have met some people from the Chinese church, some that have been around in Houston for a long time, and in the Korean church, at least since I've been young, like there were people that were older that were still there. But Seoul Baptist Church would be a good church to look into and ask, because they have now like transitioned to like an English service where it's just English speaking and stuff, but they're thinking missionally. They have people that go and do things with, Muslims and stuff, and not everybody, but some people. And so at least they're talking, at least the top, leadership is talking about it, because that changes, the trickle down of the church if leadership is like challenging people. And I know that their people are, and then West Houston Chinese Church has perspective. They had perspectives last semester.
Oh, wow.
And predominantly the class was Chinese. They either came from that church or another. So that is encouraging, and I was like, I would love to see the Vietnamese church like this, but I can't imagine it. Like, I can't imagine it like that. But you also look at the believers that are in country. Like, the churches there are exploding. Like, Korea's been growing. Like, one of the biggest churches in all of the world is in Korea, South Korea, and the Chinese church now is like sustainable. They don't need Westerners. They don't need workers to be there. They're sustainable on their own. And so I also look at those as not necessarily a model, because I know that the Vietnamese people it's gonna be different in that country, in our country, but I see it as hopeful, like those. And then in Africa too, like speaking with some missionaries their parents were missionaries in Africa years ago, had retired. They're retired now, but their parents were, and like just to see over the last 100 years it be completely different, from when they first started to now. So it can happen within a lifetime. I just happen to be maybe in the beginning stages of that,
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, for all of the challenge that we talk about with mobilizing Vietnamese, I think you're right to look to these other two examples for encouragement, and I'm encouraged that you're going, because that's kind of, I think that's the strength of doing this kind of work in a city like Houston, is that you can mobilize people from all over the world to go to all over the world.
Right.
And so in spite of how we might feel corporately about, what this church or that church might be doing or not doing, you're going.
Yeah.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
And so
I'm excited.
I'm really excited, not just that you're going, but that you're going back to Vietnam, or going to Vietnam.
Yeah.
Is it back to, or is it just two?
Two. I was born in the States.
Yeah, okay, so just two.
Yeah.
So that's really cool. So anyway, thank you for taking the time to share your story with me. I know there are others who are going to find a lot of comfort in what you've had to say.
Cool, thank you.